Thank you.
Well, let's talk what's happening in the region, which since March of 2011 has seen a series of upheavals. Syria, Egypt, even in Turkey. How has that affected things inside of Israel?
There was a prime minister, Menachem Begin, who, when the war between Iraq and Iran took place, he said this unforgettable sentence, "We wish good luck to both sides." I think in many ways in Israel, there is some kind of satisfaction that Arabs are killing Arabs. It is also a wonderful weapon for the right-wingers to show with them you want to make peace, with Syria, with Assad, with those butchers. So it serves, psychologically, it serves against any kind of hope of peace, because people tend to say those are the Arabs, and they are killing, and you know, when you look at Syria, you are speechless. So on one hand, it was very destructive. On the other hand, one should remember not to make the mixture. International terror, international jihad, Daesh, Al-Qaeda, the war in Syria, in Iraq, in Libya, elsewhere, has very little to do with the freedom fight of the Palestinian people for its freedom. And mixing it is serving Israeli propaganda. No, you should see the borderline, and there is a borderline. It doesn't, first of all those factors don't play yet in Palestine. Neither Daesh, nor Al-Qaeda, all those international jihadists are not there yet. They might get there, but they are not there yet. And secondly, they are fighting a very clear cause, and in my view, a very just cause. While when you look at Syria, for example, nobody knows what is it all about. In Israel, in Palestine, it's very clear. It's a freedom fight, exactly like many freedom fights before, like in many ways the Jewish freedom fight over Israel, including the same means. People who fight for the freedom use many times terror as their only weapon, because that's the last outlet, because they don't have jets. So they use knives. It seems terrible, but still a jet who spreads bombs is much more cruel than a young Palestinian with a knife. So we should not involve one thing with the other. What happened in the Arab world is very credible. Maybe it's only a stage. You know about it much more than I do. Maybe it's a stage for a better future, a very painful and bloody stage. Maybe not, I don't know. But this has nothing to do with the fight of the Palestinian people for freedom.
You talked about the profound psychological disconnect that you encounter with many Israelis. How do you talk to your friends who disagree with you on this issue?
I don't have friends who disagree with me.
Do you have chosen friendships?
I have chosen friendship. I don't have chosen sons. And my unchosen sons disagree with me, but with them I have no other choice but to remain their loving father. But except of my sons, look, we are not dealing here with politics. It's much beyond politics. I think it's about morality. By the end of the day, it's about human values and morality. And I must be frank with you, I can't be a friend of someone who supports the occupation, because it's not, his view about a certain subject and my view. He's a socialist, I'm a capitalist. We are dealing here with clear moral values. And I can't be a friend of immoral people. So I don't get into it. Thank you.
The boycott, divestment, sanctions movement, which you alluded to during your presentation, has been gaining ground in the US and in Europe as well. Some very prominent musicians have refused, for example, to perform in Israel, and there have been other cultural groups that have refused to go. So you suggest in your presentation that this is an opening, an aperture to create some space.
Look, it took me some time to get to it. And there were years, if I would have come here 5 years ago, I would talk in a different way. But the more nothing is happening, the more, as I said, I realize that the only game in town right now is BDS. And again, it has no guarantee to succeed. Until now, BDS has had much more psychological effect than real economical effect. But psychological effect has a meaning. The fact that in Jerusalem they are sweating so much about BDS is a source of hope, and they are really sweating. I mean, they deal with it like, that's the new Iran. After Iran is gone, now we have to have our next enemy who threatens our existence, and this is BDS now in official Jerusalem. And yes, it's not a pure way, but it's a courageous, non-violent way of the world to tell Israel what the world thinks, to say what is moral and what is immoral, what is acceptable and what is not acceptable, and to try to make Israelis pay for the crimes. Because by the end of the day, they are not responsible, they are not taken accountable, and they are being punished for any of their crimes. Killing of 1,000 women and children in Gaza in 2014, 500 women, 500 children, many of them babies. This is something that someone has to take accountability on it. This is something that someone has to be punished for. Yes, I know that in Syria it's the daily rate but so what? Nobody treats Israel like Syria. Israel claims it's part of the Western world. Israel is financed and supported by the Western world, and Israel has to follow Western values. And killing 1,000 children should not be something that will be accepted. And the only way for civil societies to say, we are not ready to do it, we are not ready to accept it, will be to boycott, yeah. And my dearest friend, from here, I'm going to California to meet an adorable Englishman, Roger Waters, who leads the BDS, or is in many ways the face of BDS. We became very close friends after I interviewed him. And I think that people like Roger Waters are the face of consciousness today, are the face of humanity. And what he calls for, singers, don't go to Israel. Make Israelis think about what they are doing. Make Israelis pay in a way, in a non-violent way, is the only game, and a very promising one.
But don't you think the BDS movement, and this has been suggested by Norman Finkelstein here and Noam Chomsky and others, is the wrong tactic, because supporters of the occupation in Israel saying, look, there's the Goyim again, they're ganging up on the Jews.
Very good point. Norman Finkelstein, I remember from a trip we did both together in Gaza when our taxi was stuck in the sand and we had both to push the taxi, which was, for a moment a very symbolic picture. The only thing is that it had a good ending, while all our other struggles don't have a good ending, because finally we could move the taxi out of the sand. But both Noam Finkelstein, obviously Noam Chomsky, are, remarkable icons for me also personally. I understand what they mean. I think they have a point. But what other ways are being left? Okay, let's say that they are right. Israelis will become even more hawkish and more nationalistic because the world is against us. This will last for a short while. Look, in the last war in Gaza, all the Western airlines stopped to fly to Tel Aviv for 36 hours. The first one was Austrian Airlines. I wrote an article, Austrian Airlines will bring peace. because I knew that after 2 or 3 days, the Israelis will get out of their minds. After 3 days, they will give up the entire occupied territories only to reopen the airport. I truly believe that the day, for example, that the United States will do something very simple. Settlers who violate the international law according to the State Department are not allowed to this country like any other criminals. Criminals are not allowed. The first stage will be exactly as Norman Finkelstein and Noam Chomsky are describing. Israelis will say, we will not surrender, we will not give up. But you know what it is for an Israeli not to be in Macy's for more than a year? Do you know the price of not getting to Selfridges? I mean, can you see it happening? I don't see it happening.
Well, let me ask you a question which has more of a U.S. focus, and that is the putative power of what's called the Israeli lobby. Now, AIPAC, which is an acronym, the America-Israel Public Affairs Committee, is considered the powerhouse Israeli lobby. They fought against the Iran deal tooth and nail, full-page ads in major newspapers, advertisements, television, commercials, etc. And they didn't succeed, despite these Herculean efforts to reverse the deal. So do you think the power of the lobby is overrated?
First of all, let me say that with such friends, Israel don't need enemies. And I mean it. It's not only because it sounds good. I think AIPAC and this kind of so-called friendly organization created a lot of damage to Israel. And I wish they would really become weaker and weaker. And people say, I'm not an expert for this, people say they are weaker. But, you know, when it comes to Israel and Palestine, I don't see them getting weaker. When I see 88 senators signing 2 weeks ago on a petition, whatever was there that the United States will not take one-sided steps against Israel in the Security Council. Can you think about one subject that 88, let's say we want to ask the senators to sign a petition that today's Wednesday. Will you get 88 signatures? I'm not sure. Let me doubt it. Let me doubt it. And when it comes to Israel, you get it again and again. And that's the power of AIPAC and other factors. So yes, in Iran they failed. Thanks God they failed, by the way, because this was the only way to prevent a horrible war. And this deal, just last week, the international agencies declared that Iran is following the agreement, carefully following it. But this was the only way open, the only non-violent and non-military way open. And I'm so happy they failed. I don't see them failing when it comes to Israel and Palestine. You have now your elections, and again you see only the two candidates in a competition who is more pro-Israeli than the other, who is more pro-occupation, because anyone today who is pro-Israeli means pro-occupation. And I don't see any cracks in this. I don't see it happening. I don't see it happening, no.
You mentioned the huge arms deal, the aid that's going to be coming from the Obama administration for the next 10 years, the most generous aid package in history. At the same time, virtually, the State Department condemning the Gilo expansion of settlements as corrosive, as inimical to the peace process. So you have all carrot and no stick, because there's no price being paid.
I must tell you, and I will not be very politically correct, it's quite disgusting, really. Those declarations of the State Department, really, I mean, you finance those settlements, so why do you condemn them? What is this hypocrisy? The day that you will want those settlements to stop, they will stop on the same day. But you never wanted to stop them. You never really wanted them. So what is this hypocrisy? When I hear even Obama, which is really a great, great, great president, no doubt about it, and great man, but when he speaks about the fact that the occupation cannot last forever, what do you mean cannot last forever? You made it last forever. With those $38 billion, you made it last for another 10 years. What did you do to put an end to it? What did you do to put an end to it? And therefore, I'd rather see, I always prefer, hardline right-wingers who say the truth and not this hypocrisy, both in my country, you know, those who speak about condemning Israel for the settlements and on the same very same day supply anything possible to continue this project.
What's the situation of the 20% of the Israeli population that's Arab? Some of them are Muslims, some are Christian, Armenians, and other minorities.
So first of all, for the few of those who don't know, we have 20% of Israeli citizenship are Israeli Palestinians or Israeli Arabs, as they are called, and they gain full civil rights. They are deeply discriminated, but on a formal level, they gain equal rights. They can vote to the parliament. They have the representatives. Unlikely the Palestinian brothers and sisters who live under the Israeli occupation, who have no rights, no civil rights whatsoever. This 20% community is undergoing now a very, very interesting process, really fascinating, which is in many ways dialectic, because on one way, they become more and more Israeli. They speak the language, they watch the Israeli TV, they read the Israeli newspapers, some of them are doing careers as doctors, as other, and they become more and more Israeli. But in the same time, they become also more and more nationalistic, Palestinian nationalistic, more and more proud about their heritage, because the first and second generation were under the trauma of 48, and they were really totally smashed and paralyzed. But now there is a new generation who, you know, we had this incident now which became a big story in Israel. Some of you might have heard about it. Their biggest party in the parliament, the Joint List, which has 13 seats out of 120 in the Knesset, they decided not to participate in the funeral of Shimon Peres. And this created enormous anger toward them in Israel. But they say, enough with this hypocrisy. We feel that this man, and we will not get into it now, but this man is part of the Zionistic regime who did all those atrocities to us, and we cannot participate in this national ritual. This couldn't have happened 10 years ago. No way. They would never dare. So it's fascinating to follow what will happen. And it depends much on what will happen in the West Bank and Gaza, obviously.
And what's happening in terms of budget allocation to the Palestinian villages? Are they comparable to what the Jewish cities and towns are getting?
By all means not. I mean, the discrimination is very, very deep in any level. Economically, legally, you bring a Palestinian to court and a Jew to court on the very same charges, and you get different punishments. This was proven in researches and surveys that were made. They are discriminated in jobs. You know, take the National Electricity Company. I don't remember now the figures, but more or less 20,000 employees, 20 out of them will be Palestinians, Israeli Palestinians. That's the proportion in the big governmental companies. It's a very deep discrimination, which I must say Netanyahu tries a little bit to improve, because he understands that at least through economy, he thinks that through economy he can achieve everything, the economical peace, so-called, yeah. But he's doing some kind of efforts. It's a long way to go. They are discriminated deeply in any possible field.
So are you saying that, for example, you gave that, you mentioned the doctor.
Right.
These are the exceptions rather than the rule.
Absolutely. Look, we have a Supreme Court judge who is an Israeli Arab. We have some doctors, we have some scientists, but they are exactly the exceptions.
What's happened over the years, in your view, to the Israeli left? And I don't want to overstate it, but it was fairly vibrant at one time. Is that eroded because of the weight of the occupation?
No, it all started in the Second Intifada, in the
2000.
beginning of 2000. Two things happened then. First, Prime Minister Ehud Barak went to Camp David, to the peace conference with Yasser Arafat, and came back with the lie that there is no Palestinian partner. This lie was, in a very efficient way, spread all over the Israeli peace camp. And in many ways, it destroyed the peace camp, because people started to believe there is no Palestinian partner. I, by the way, claim that for putting an end to occupation, you don't even need a partner. Because putting an end to occupation is something, if I steal your car, David, I'm not in a position to put conditions for returning the car to you. First return the car, then we'll see if you are a partner, if we can live together, if we can't live together, but first of all, return the car, for God's sake. But he convinced most of the Israelis there is no Palestinian partner. And then came the Intifada, which was very cruel, with the exploding buses, with the suicide bombers, and the peace camp was finally and totally smashed. It put some question mark, or the question, how solid was it if it gave up so rapidly? But one thing I can tell you, in the summer of '82, when the first Lebanese war took place, and there was the massacre, as you remember, in Sabra and Shatila, which was not directly made by Israeli soldiers, but under the supervision of Israeli soldiers. There were 400,000 Israelis in the main square of Tel Aviv to protest. Today, if the very same massacre will take place, there won't be 400 Israelis to protest. And this tells you the story of the Israeli left.
I mean, that's quite an indictment of the society.
Yeah?
What is hasbara?
Propaganda in English.
And how effective is it in Israel?
So effective that people like me are totally a small, tiny, marginal minority. Hasbara is a laundry of words. It is propaganda. They are using it here. They are using it in Israel. It's full of half-truths and lies, like any propaganda. It is totally one-sided. Many times it's embarrassing how one-sided it is. It's about to praise Israel, how gay-friendly we are. Thank you very much. But how do you treat the Palestinians half an hour away from all those gay clubs, which I hardly appreciate? But you can't come with this burden on your back and to claim I am a liberal society, because you are not. And you can't claim that you are the only democracy in the Middle East when you carry this regime in your backyard. So all this hasbara is for either ignorant people or people who don't want to know. And as you know, it is quite effective still.
No, we don't want to end on a note of hope and inspiration.
By all means not.
But what keeps you going? Who inspires you in terms of journalism?
First of all, my partner, she's somewhere here. I met Catherine in Gaza, a very good pickup place.
Isn't it? What's the line?
What's
a nice girl like you doing in Gaza?
Exactly. I recommend all of you who are single or intend to become single, go to Gaza. We met in Gaza 10 years ago, and Catherine is a Swedish novelist and journalist. And I think life with her, not that I was before a great Zionist and a great right-winger, but life with someone who has this perspective from the outside. affected me a lot, and most of my articles are not my views, are her views. Many times I don't agree to what I write, but there is no other choice. But I think it affected me. What affected me also, and this must be mentioned, is what I saw, purely what I saw. Because I do this ungrateful job week after week, and I go at least once a week to the occupied territories, really to the most grassroots families, people who just yesterday lost their sons, their daughters, their families, people who went through terrible things. Week after week, it will be next year 30 years. So this shapes also your consciousness. This shapes your understanding of things, because when you see it without any filters, you talk to the people, yeah, on a total equal basis. This, I mean, any person with some kind of conscience would have come to the very, very same conclusion that I did, only by witnessing it. The problem is that so many people are not aware to what's going on and don't want to be aware. And what is more a pleasure than to be a hated Israeli? I mean, the curse I hear in the street, my partner, she doesn't speak Hebrew, but she knows all the curse that they are calling at me by heart. There was a time even in which I needed a bodyguard in the time of the war in Gaza in 2014. I mean, what is more fueling, more inspiring than to know that you touch a certain sensitive nerve? Because I know that this anger shows one thing, that most of the Israelis know that something is burning under their feet. Because otherwise, why would they care about one journalist, crazy journalist, lunatic journalist, who writes all kinds of rubbish? Let them write it in a small newspaper. But the fact that it freaks them so much out gives me a lot of satisfaction, because I know at least they know something is burning, something went wrong. Thank you.
Well, judging by the applause and the laughter, I think a lot of people are very in tune with what you're saying, but they're going to leave here tonight. What recommendations or what tools can you give them so that they can spread the word and they can help propagate a movement toward peace and the end of the occupation?
First of all, I hardly know what I should do. So to tell other people to do, I mean, I'm really a story of failure. Whatever I wrote, whatever I said, history goes exactly to the opposite direction. So I'm not sure I'm the right person to give advices to others. But I think that most of the people know here exactly what to do. Mainly to raise your voice. Each of you in your own field, in your own way. One can go for boycott and one can go for solidarity with Palestinians. And it can be going over and learning and seeing and watching, because there is nothing like seeing it with your own eyes and judging it according to your own personal experience. And meet people and come to all the events of the Lannan Foundation.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, David. You're very good. Thank you. Thank you very much.